Chris, tell us a little bit about REA. I mean, I've been a customer on REA before, but let's make sure everybody really understands what goes on behind one of the world's, one of Australia's most well-known websites.
Yeah, many people don't know the size and scale of REA. And, REA has 2,800 employees across 3 continents. And our goal every day is to change the way the world experiences property. And that's our purpose. And we're very aligned to that. And it's a wonderful startup story. So REA started in a garage in Melbourne in 1995 and has now grown to be, a $13.5 billion market cap company. And we provide full services and scale across all of the kind of property value stream lifecycle. We've got 16 brands across those 3 continents, and many of you would be familiar with realestate.com.au, Real Commercial, Flatmates, if you're searching for a rental property, for example. But many of you probably don't know, we have 12.6 million unique visitors every single month. And at peak times during the day, we serve about 10,000 property images a second.
Wow.
To 60% of Australia's adult population. So people love using REA, and we are the #1 listings portal in Australia. We also have a data business called PropTrack, and PropTrack effectively sells data research, automatic valuation models to financial institutions and banks. And speaking of, we also acquired Smartline and Mortgage Choice not that long ago. And that now makes us the 2nd largest mortgage broking company in Australia. And we took a strategic investment in a company called Sympology, which have all the pipes and connectivity into their banks, into their credit decisioning and lending systems. And this gives our brokers really great tools, but also means we can start to build mortgages on platforms. So when someone comes to search for a house, they need to buy a property, we can give them financing right there and they can apply for a mortgage straight through. More globally, we have a controlling interest in REA India. And REA India has something called housing.com, and that's the #1 listings portal in India as well. In fact, I was in India just last week with the team there, and we had a very coordinated scraping bot attack on REA, and I was getting PagerDuty alerts constantly, right? So it was keeping me up to date with what was going, even though I was in a different continent. We have other stakes as well. So we own a significant investment in Move Inc., which runs Realtor.com in the US, which you'd probably be very familiar with, and also Property Guru in Asia. So, as you can see, we've grown up to be a very large company with a distributed footprint, offering services across the whole life cycle of people's property journey and experience.
Just sounds like a really easy job.
It's fun. Keeps me really busy.
So we were chatting, and
Yeah.
I think you were in a taxi going from one airport to the next, and we really appreciate you making time to be with us today, because I know many of us have been on the road a lot the last several weeks as things have opened up, and it's been lovely to see people, but it's also been a little amazing how many places we've been. One of the things that you talked about that I know you're really passionate about is solving for cognitive overload for your team. Can you talk about what that means for them and what you're doing to try and keep your teams focused, productive, and innovative?
Yeah, I think it was great to see your presentation, because you talked about that kind of toil, you talked about that interrupt workflow. And we are all seeing that today, right? There's just a barrage of information coming to us every day. And many of you in the audience are probably software engineers, so I'm preaching to the converted here. But what you need to know as a software engineer today to do your job is just staggering.
Yeah.
The amount of tools you need to know, the number of programming languages, command line tools, knowledge of cloud systems, Docker, Kubernetes, there is a lot that you need to know to get your job done. In fact, we had Kelsey Hightower, who's Google's kind of software advocate, and I like to call him the godfather of Kubernetes. He was visiting REA, just a few weeks back, and we were chatting about this problem, and he said he feels like that effectively we've let the tools leak too far into the developers' hands. And they were never meant to go that far. They were meant to stay with operations teams, with platform teams. But, just because you can use those doesn't mean you necessarily should. And so that was interesting, because it ties into this cognitive overload. And at REA, we're working really hard to, try and solve this. And we're doing that in a few ways. One, we create what we call platform and enablement teams. And this is not a new concept to many people. But the way we build these platform teams, I think, is quite interesting and unique. We build products for our engineering, development, and product communities. and we treat them like products we ship to our consumers and customers. We have product owners, we run engagement surveys, and the job of these product teams is to build products that our engineers, use, and it takes those daily activities away from them and toil. A product engineering team shouldn't have to worry about standing up a hardened EC2 environment with all WAF rules and all the config that's needed, and integrating BuildKite, which we use. I saw that logo up there before. That is not productive work, and it's not keeping them focused on the customer. So we abstract that away. We have a whole series of tools in a brand that we call internally Colab. And Colab has got all these tools that developers use, things like, CI/CD pipeline tools, automated environment building, shipping Lambdas into AWS automatically at the touch of a button, identity tools. So all of these things that engineers say, hey, this is kind of boring and I don't want to do this. We say, yeah, we'll automate that away for you. And so that's what our platform teams do. We also have enablement teams. And enablement teams are really those scarce teams like cybersecurity, legal, risk, etc. And they're like hit squads, and they move around where's needed. And their job is to, again, take that cognitive load away from the engineering
so you're really
teams.
reducing the burden on the developers that are building prod.
Yeah, for sure.
And building primitives that make it easier for them to innovate faster and more seamlessly.
That's exactly right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you have over 70 autonomous teams across the business, right? And that's a lot of chaos to manage, even in a chaos engineering sort of environment. When they have different independencies, like how do you deal with the different modes of operation across those teams? Like, are you driving standards? Like, how are you thinking about?
It's a great question and a very interesting problem, right? If you think about, having that many teams that are distributed across the organization, communication is can be very difficult. In fact, Andrea and I were just talking before you came on stage about, what's the tipping point? You have a small startup with a few people and you grow, and when you get to 100, 150, you can still effectively manage communication. But once you go past that, things get difficult. In fact, Robert Dunbar with Dunbar's number really effectively talked about, when you scale over 150, communication becomes difficult. And I wonder if that number in hybrid working and COVID times and remote is actually smaller now, because communication is kind of a little bit harder. So to answer your question though, how do we do it? So we're broken into, similar to a Spotify model, we have domains, we have tribes, we have squads, and all of those are aligned to our purpose, which is to change the way the world experiences property. But then we have a strategy, a growth strategy underpinned by an OKR framework. Everyone's really clear on what those OKRs are. And the one thing at REA, we're a data-driven company. We value data, not opinions. So everything is measured. And so we know how you're tracking to that. We meet monthly with our execs. We have quarterly business reviews, which dive much deeper. We have town halls where we talk about, what the updates are. So that's part of it. The other part is obviously having great tools. And we've got all the best tools, of course we have PagerDuty, but we have Slack, we have GitHub, we have Miro, we have all the collaboration tools that, engineers need and product delivery teams need to communicate and collaborate. But I don't think that's enough. In today's world where you're disconnected, you've still got to maintain relationships. And so we try and run in-person events as much as possible as COVID has allowed. You just can't underestimate that face-to-face connection. When you join an organization and you're just a sea of faces on Zoom, the trust factor that you build with individuals, it's just not the same. And then teams meet in person for the first time, and the connectivity level and the trust factor goes up, and that builds, trust and communication. So I think, that's another super important factor. And then we run guilds. We have our programming guilds, we have functional programming guilds, we have mobile guilds, we run mobile days. So hyper communication constantly. I do videos every single week to the organization, what's happening, what's going on in technology, just to keep people informed, because in that remote environment, they need to consume it at a time that suits them, because I don't want to add to that kind of cognitive overload that, they're experiencing in their daily jobs.
Totally. Well, in this environment where you're overloaded, prioritization becomes super important. And you've talked about connecting your teams back to OKRs, but you also have mentioned making sure that your teams are working on the business, not just in the business. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think this is an issue that gets accelerated by COVID. I mean, you
Totally.
touched on it perfectly in your presentation,
Well, thank
right?
you.
Yeah,
Somebody help me with that.
the number of interrupts we all face on a daily basis. If you're in back-to-back Zooms all day, how are you working on the business? If, you're getting constantly interrupted by Slack messages, you've got email, you've got, GitHub, popping in your face with pull requests to deal with. You've got SMSs, you've got friends and family at home, and, all the things that keep you out of flow. And what's important is to keep, development teams in flow as much as possible. And so we try and do a lot of things to, help people work on the business very deliberately, because we believe, if you're working on the business, it gives you a chance to step back, not deal with the minutiae, but focus on, what are the strategic problems you're trying to solve? How do you look outside, look for experiences outside your organization? And you have to make time for that. I know when we spoke, you said you book out your Fridays, right?
Yeah,
a whole
no
Friday.
meeting Fridays just to keep my wits about me.
Exactly. And I do the same thing from 11 o'clock every Friday. It's free. And I use that time for research, study, looking out, thinking about the business. And I'm very protective of that. So, that's something I do. But what do we do more broadly for our teams? We have a Zoom free meeting time every single day, company-wide across REA, 12 to 2, no Zoom meetings. And that gives people a chance to have a break, have lunch, but then also spend a really solid hour thinking, focusing every single day. In summer, we have Summer Fridays. So every Friday afternoon in summer, you get to choose how you spend that day. And that means you can spend time, getting your training up to date, thinking about the business, doing strategy. You can have a mental health day. You basically choose the best thing that suits you to do that. So some of these techniques kind of help us, ensure that, in the environment with the way we're working keeps people connected and working on the business, not in it.
And to your point, like bringing their best work and the best version of yourselves to work. Like one of PagerDuty's values is bring yourself. And what we found, almost 2 years ago was that people were exhausted, and the languishing meant that people were not only not having a good work experience, they were finding it hard to do their best work. And so PagerDuty launched a 4-day work week once a month. We call them Dutonian Wellness Days. And you have a day off every Friday or Monday, that one time a month, to just, get yourself back together, to do the things that you need to do to be able to bring yourself back to the office, your best self back to the office. And we just launched our second wellness week. So we shut down for the first week of July now and the week between the Christmas holiday and New Year's, to just give people a chance to recharge. And I had a lot of peers challenge me on, what does that mean for productivity? Like, what does it mean for results? And in fact, our business results have improved top and bottom line since we started doing this, because I think people are making better use of their time. They're able to bring the best version of themselves to work. They're able to collaborate, more effectively and do what they need to do to take care of themselves. And
that's a great case study. We'll have to look at what you do there.
Yeah, so, it's really interesting listening to how much REA Group has grown, and you're managing a number of different brands and a lot of different digital properties. How do you keep your teams customer-centric when when you serve such a wide range of customers with different products?
Yeah, I think that's, it's a challenge. If you think about all the things people do, they come to REA to, search for property. So that's what our consumers do, or they search for a place to rent. Our real estate agents will, use our services to list properties and advertising on behalf of their customers. And they use our tools to help them prepare for meetings, for example, to go out there. We've got people who leverage our property business. And so we've got mortgage broking. So we've got a diverse customer group and a diverse business that solves that. And consumer experiences, as we know, there's no news here. It's shaped by, we've heard all this before, shaped by Amazon and Google and Apple and blah, blah, blah. We've heard that, but, it's so true. So our experiences have to be there. And we do that by communicating a lot, right? Just like you said up there, you ask your customers a lot what they want. So number one, you have to ask your customers what they want. And then you have to listen to them, but it's no point listening to them if you then don't have the ability to execute on what you've heard. And so the second thing you have to have as an organization and a business is highly agile, autonomous, teams that can deliver at speed and can deliver at scale. And so, we run full stack engineering teams, autonomous, across all those squads and tribes that we talked about. And that gives us the ability to adapt and pivot, because what you're trying to do is build adaptable organizations. You don't know what's coming around the corner. And so staying customer centric means listening, adapting and moving, because if you're not, I tell you what, there's a startup or there's someone else there who's thinking about it, and they're going to step into the space if you're too slow. So having that, clear strategy, listening to your customers, and having teams that can evolve and adapt really, really quickly to meet customer needs, and then using data to back that up. we during the COVID time, we had a really interesting situation where people weren't allowed to visit properties, or if they were, they had to book appointments.
Right.
And normally we have, people queuing outside the door, hundreds of people waiting to get into a property to visit. And a real estate agent is limited by time. For them, if you think about their priority, give me the best qualified leads so that I know that I'm not wasting my time. And so we use data. We've got a lot of machine learning, AI, ML that runs on all our unique data. And that helps ensure that the people that are served up to them, as customers are real and aren't going to waste their time. So
it's
all
all about
about
the neighbor doing a sticky peek to see what the
exactly that, and we all do that constantly, right? Yeah. So we had to make sure that in COVID time, especially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think so much innovation came out of this pandemic period that we should also be celebrating. I mean, if we weren't so tired, we would probably be celebrating it more. But when you think about some of the things that we've been able to accomplish as a society and all of the different brands that all of you represent, one thing I would point out is we're just really impressed with what we've seen in our customer base, the level of innovation, the way you have all pivoted, the way you've sort of risen above this opportunity, but also made the most of it. Crisis is the mother of invention in many cases. And so it's been really fun to watch companies like REA grow in this environment and find new ways to do business, to build their business, to serve their customers. And the other thing that when I hear about customer centricity, there's another side of the coin, which is you also have to focus. Like, we listen to our customers. We can't do everything you ask us to do, because some of the things you ask us to do would be ridiculous. And they might be ridiculous because they're orthogonal to where our roadmap is headed or our strategy, or because you're the only customer who needs that and it's not more marketable to a broader audience. So focus and setting priorities and being disciplined about matching what your teams are working on to the strategy, I think, are super important as well.
Yeah.
Now, I think you told me that 22 Australians open an REA app every second. And you're not just scaling, but you're expanding to other regions. You're making investments. Your services are complex and multiplying. How do you anchor your organization on these key strategic initiatives? Because I love it when executives tell me about their OKRs and how well aligned they are. But I know what that looks like, behind the curtain.
Behind the scenes, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you keep everybody on task?
I don't think we're that different. I think what's really important is to have a purpose that people align behind. And, I talked about our purpose, and it is to change the way the world experiences property. And it's a bold purpose, but it's something that, we've talked to our staff and our employees about a lot, and saying, does this align with you? Do you resonate with it? Do you understand the work you're doing is aligned to this? And they all agree, yes, it is. So that's a great thing to have a purpose to anchor to. But you then have to have a really strong strategic plan. And so we have an annual strategy planning process, and that really looks at our strategy and says, right, do we need to change? Do we need to pivot? What's the context? What's changed in the market? And where's growth coming from? And so once we've got the context and the why, we then start to sort of think about the how. And like you said, we then have a very strong OKR process. I've worked in a number of organizations. I've never seen an organization take OKRs as seriously as, as REA does. So we know all the activities, all the things that roll up to achieve that strategy and growth plan, and they're distributed amongst all of those domains, the squads and the tribes. So everyone is aligned on what they need to do.
So every person in a team knows that the work that they're working on contributes to the bigger picture.
To the bigger picture. And that's what we try and do. So we developed what we call strategy on a page, a really simple pictorial diagram, and we rolled that out at town halls. We had, in-person leadership meetings. We had practice sessions with all our leaders to say, can you recite this back in 5 minutes and explain what it is? And literally, we've spent so much time communicating that to ensure that there's that alignment and purpose. So it's just communicate, and then over-communicate. But also then, circle back every now and then and measure and track to go, do people feel aligned? Ask them, do you understand the work that you're working on? Do you know why you're coming to work every day? Because that purpose really, I guess, drives people to, deliver and innovate.
There's an old saying that I live by: repetition doesn't spoil the song.
Yeah.
When you're a leader, your conviction's going to be tested over and over again, and you have to repeat yourself over and over again. And I get sick of the sound of my own voice, and I only have to be reminded that almost half of our company is new in the last 2 years because we've been growing. And many of those people joined during the pandemic, didn't have an office to go to, didn't meet their colleagues, for several months or not years. And so I'm repeating things that, we ideated 6 years ago, and it sometimes feels ridiculous, but it's kind of an important thing to remember. So I want to close on one last question. You and I are both very passionate about team health. I mentioned it multiple times this morning, and it's something that you and I have talked about. And I just want to congratulate you because I heard that REA Group was ranked 4th in the Australian best companies to work for, and that is just incredible. But what are you doing to leverage tools to try and create a great employee experience and help manage this burnout issue that we know is a real issue?
Yeah. Look, I think it's burnout, and it's also a challenge that we're all faced at the moment, right? Through the COVID pandemic, lack of immigration, there is a global tech shortage, and there's significantly a huge tech shortage in Australia. And so you need to have a really strong, EVP, employee value proposition to attract people. And so tools are some of that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think it's a lot more than that, right? You've got to think about the employee experience, employee health from the day they walk into your organization. We're a diverse, inclusive organization. We were voted, by the Diversity Inclusion Council as diverse. We have high engagement scores. 86% of people, are highly engaged. 93% say it's a great place to work, for example. And that comes about the culture and inclusive collaborative behavior. So once people walk in the door, you want them to feel enabled. The next thing is give them autonomy. So hire great people, give them autonomy, and then empower them with some of the best tools. So we do that. We give people choice. They walk in the door, the engineers, developers, right to the product people, they can choose Windows, they can choose Mac, they can choose iOS, they can choose Android. It's up to them. And similar with tools. We have a set of tools that developers can use, but they're not limited to that. And we have a process where people can select. In fact, I think it was back in 2014 where our engineers said, hey, we have a monolithic SMS system for alerts. We want PagerDuty. And we had a process to select PagerDuty. And, as a result of that, we now have thousands of our employees using PagerDuty. And we use it beyond engineering as well. So our customer service teams, for example, use PagerDuty to get alerts for fraud. And they're frontline people that then can deal and interact with our customers and handle fraud. So it's all about choice, right? And the more choice you can give people, empower them with those choices, give them processes to change. I think ultimately you get a better employee experience and a better outcome for your customers.
Well, I know Chris is hiring. He's such a great example as a
as
leader. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time today and for your support. You're one of those customers that sets a great example, but also holds us to a high standard. And we really appreciate you joining us in person today. Thanks for being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.